They laughed at him every single morning. Loud enough for him to hear it. And Cole Hatfield kept doing it anyway, stopping to talk to the old janitor like the man was someone who mattered, right up until the day he lost his job, his income, and what was left of his pride all in the same Tuesday morning. That was the day everyone who had laughed at him stopped being relevant. Because what was coming next had been set in motion years before any of them could have understood it, by 90 seconds of conversation in a hallway that nobody else bothered to have. Cole Hatfield was 36 years old and built like a man who had never once been given anything without working for it. He operated the No. 3 press at North Lake Timber Products, a processing plant on the western edge of Thunder Bay, Ontario, a city that sits at the top of Lake Superior like a fist pressed against the cold. The plant smelled like raw pine and hydraulic fluid and the particular sharpness of metal that has been running hot since midnight. Cole had been on the day shift for 7 years. He arrived early. He left on time. He kept his head down in the way of a man who has decided that consistency is its own form of loyalty and does not require an audience. He had a son named Brody, 11 years old, with Cole's jaw and his late mother's way of going quiet instead of crying when something hurt. Cole raised him alone. Had been doing it since Brody was 4, since the accident on Highway 11 that had taken Sarah and left Cole standing in a hospital corridor in wet boots, holding a child's jacket, listening to a doctor explain something he already understood but could not yet receive. He didn't talk about it. He had simply continued. Packed lunches, parent-teacher nights, hockey registration, the particular geometry of a single father's life, scheduled and rescheduled around a job that paid the mortgage on a house that still had Sarah's handwriting on the inside of the kitchen cabinet where she used to mark Brody's height. The janitor's name was Theodore Vazel. He was 63 years old and had come to Thunder Bay from Western Ukraine 22 years earlier with $200, a secondary school diploma that Canadian employers treated like a curiosity, and a work ethic so deep it looked, from the outside, like stubbornness. He had driven a forklift, laid asphalt, and cleaned offices before landing at North Lake, where he had mopped floors and maintained washrooms and emptied bins on the morning shift for the past 14 years. He moved through the plant the way water moves through a pipe, steady, unremarkable, essential, and almost entirely invisible to the people who depended on it. Nobody talked to Theodore. This was not a policy. It was simply what happened to a man who had been present long enough to stop being noticed. The supervisors spoke past him. The younger floor workers looked through him. A man named Garrett Slade, who ran the No. 1 press and had an opinion on everything and the volume to ensure it reached everyone, once mimicked Theodore's accent in the break room to get a laugh. He got several. Cole had been standing at the far end of the table eating his lunch, and he had looked at Garrett for a long, flat moment and said nothing. But he had felt something settle in his chest like a stone dropping to the bottom of still water, and it had stayed there. What Cole did, every single morning, without variation, for 6 years, was stop at the East Corridor Junction where Theodore began his shift and say good morning. Not a performance. Not a demonstration. He had done it the first time because the man had been standing there alone and something in his posture had caught Cole's attention. The particular stillness of a person who has long stopped expecting to be acknowledged. Cole had said good morning because it cost nothing. The next day he had done it again. By the third week it had become something else, something with the comfortable weight of routine. He asked about Theodore's shoulder, which had been operated on the previous winter. He asked about the drive-in, because Theodore lived 30 minutes out and the highway iced badly in January. He asked, once, about Ukraine, about what it had been like before, and Theodore had paused his mop, leaned on the handle, and spoken for 4 full minutes about a city called Lviv and a river called the Poltva and his mother's kitchen, which had always smelled like dill and wood smoke. Cole had listened to every word. Garrett Slade noticed. Most people noticed, eventually, because the East Corridor Junction was visible from the break room window. Garrett called Cole the diplomat for about 3 weeks in a tone that made the word mean something smaller than it was. Cole absorbed it the way he absorbed most things, quietly, without adjustment. He was not performing virtue. He was simply unable to stop seeing Theodore Vazel as a person once he had started, and there was nothing in him that wanted to. The restructuring announcement came on a Wednesday in March. Corporate letterhead. Operational review. Efficiency targets. The language that large companies use when they have already decided something and need it to sound like a process. 2 full production lines were being consolidated. 18 positions across both shifts were being reviewed. The list would be confirmed within 30 days. Cole was not on the list. But the classification review that followed placed his press certification in a tier that was being phased out, not eliminated, phased, which meant that continuing in his current role would require a recertification that the plant was not funding. He could pay for it himself. Approximately $4,000 and 6 weeks of evening classes in Sudbury. He looked at his bank account. He looked at Broder's hockey fees, which were due in 3 weeks. He looked at the property tax notice on the kitchen counter. He started the application for recertification and quietly did not tell anyone how close the math was. He didn't make it. The press failed its operational inspection in May, a hydraulic fault that had been logged and deferred twice, and was pulled from service indefinitely. Cole was moved to general floor coverage while the fault was assessed. General floor coverage paid less, carried no overtime eligibility, and was, as the HR coordinator explained in a meeting that lasted 7 minutes, a temporary measure pending operational review. The operational review concluded in 11 days. Cole Hatfield was surplus to confirmed requirements. His employment was terminated effective immediately. He was given a cardboard box for his locker contents and a firm handshake from a man who did not know his son's name. He sat in his truck in the parking lot. It was 8:40 in the morning and the sky above Thunder Bay was the particular flat gray of a day that has not decided what it wants to be. He had been employed, unbroken, since he was 16 years old. He had never filed for employment insurance. He did not fully know how. He sat there for 27 minutes and did not start the engine and watched a crow walk across the hood of the car parked next to him like it owned the space, and thought about Brody, who would be home from school at 3:15, and what to say, and whether to say it before or after dinner. He filed the EI claim that afternoon. He had the script submitted by Thursday. He applied for 11 jobs by the following Monday, 2 in the city, 3 in Nipigon, 1 in Geraldton, 5 remote applications to mills and processing plants across northern Ontario. He checked his email every morning at 7, then again at noon, then again before bed, with the particular discipline of a man who has decided that hope is a verb and must be actively maintained. The first rejection came by automated reply. The second and third arrived the same afternoon, 3 minutes apart. By the second week he stopped checking email in the morning. The silence had begun to accumulate weight. By the 4th week, he was buying store-brand everything and scanning receipts at the grocery checkout with the focused attention of someone performing a calculation they cannot afford to get wrong. He told Brody that money was tight for a little while. Brody, who was 11 and had Sarah's quiet perceptiveness, said okay and started turning off the lights in rooms he wasn't using without being asked. Cole noticed this and found it almost unbearable. By the 6th week, even hope started to feel expensive. He would wake at 3 in the morning and lie in the dark and run the numbers again. The mortgage, the utilities, the EI amount, the months remaining before the arithmetic stopped working, and arrive at the same answer in the same darkness and then lie there waiting for the alarm anyway because there was nothing else to do. He had applied for 23 positions. He had received 2 interviews. Neither had advanced. Garrett Slade, he heard through someone who was still at the plant, had been retained. Had been moved to a supervisory role, in fact. Cole heard this on a Thursday night, standing at his kitchen sink, and held the information for a long moment before setting it down in a part of himself he did not visit frequently. Those who know what this feels like, the weight of doing everything right in a world that keeps choosing the wrong thing, will understand exactly what Cole was carrying in those weeks. If this story is reaching you, stay with it. What happens next is the part nobody expected. The call came on a Tuesday morning, 4 to 9 days after he had cleared his locker. An unknown number. A 807 area code, local, Thunder Bay, which meant it wasn't a recruiter calling from Toronto. He answered on the second ring. The voice was young. Mid-20s, maybe younger. Careful in the way of someone who has rehearsed an opening and is now discovering that the rehearsal didn't fully account for the reality of the other person picking up. The caller said his name was Alexei Vazel. He said his father was Theodore Vazel. He said his father had worked at North Lake Timber Products as a maintenance janitor for 14 years and had retired 18 months earlier due to a shoulder that had not fully recovered from the surgery. He said his father had passed away in January, quietly, from a cardiac event, in the bedroom of the small house in Kakabika Falls where he had lived since arriving in Canada. He said his father had left very few possessions, and almost no instructions, except for one. He said his father had kept a name written on a piece of paper inside the cover of a Ukrainian Bible on his bedside table. The name was Cole Hatfield. And beneath the name, in his father's careful, slanted printing, the handwriting of a man who had learned English as an adult and treated each letter with the respect of something hard-won, were 4 words. Check if is okay. Cole sat down on the kitchen floor. He didn't plan to. His legs simply decided the floor was where this needed to be processed. The linoleum was cold through his jeans and the refrigerator was humming and somewhere outside a neighbor's dog was barking at something and all of it felt very far away. He had not known Theodore was sick. He had not known he had retired. After Cole's own termination, the corridors of North Lake had ceased to be somewhere he thought about, and Theodore, in the way of a person whose existence was attached to a location rather than a relationship, had drifted with them. He had not thought to find out. He could not tell Alexei how long it had been since he'd thought of his father at all, and the understanding of this arrived like a cold front, sudden and total. He tried to remember the last thing he had said to Theodore in that corridor. He could not. He could not retrieve a single word of it. He knew the conversations had happened, 6 years of them, but the specific last one had not announced itself as final, the way last things almost never do, and now it was gone past recovery. That particular loss sat in him like something with edges. Alexei was still on the line. He said his father had talked about Cole. Not frequently. Theodore was not a man who talked frequently about anything, but consistently, across years, the way a person returns to something they consider worth returning to. He said his father had told him once that Cole Hatfield was the only person in 14 years at that plant who had spoken to him as though he was a man worth speaking to. He said his father had kept the name because he wanted to be sure, if anything happened, that the kindness had not gone completely unwitnessed. That someone who had given something without knowing its value should at least be checked on. Cole said he didn't deserve it. Alexei said his father would have disagreed strongly with that assessment. There was a pause. Then Alexei said there was something else. He was 26 years old. He had come to Thunder Bay from Winnipeg 2 years earlier to be closer to his father during the retirement years, and had started a trades recruitment company, small, 8 months old, operating out of a shared office on Memorial Avenue, that placed certified industrial workers with contractors across northwestern Ontario. Mining operations in Atikokan. Forestry contractors in Geraldton and Longlac. Processing facilities that were always looking for experienced press operators who knew how to read hydraulic fault logs and didn't need to be managed through the basics. He had a client in Nipigon who had been trying to fill a lead operator position for 11 weeks. He said he understood if Cole wanted time to think. He said he could send the details by email. He said the pay was above what North Lake had offered, the hours were structured for a single parent, day shift, fixed schedule, no mandatory overtime, and the client had asked him specifically for someone with a steady record and a reputation for showing up before he was expected. Cole was still sitting on the kitchen floor. The refrigerator hummed. The neighbor's dog had stopped barking. He said he didn't need time to think. What landed in him in the weeks that followed was not triumph. It was something quieter and more disorienting. The slow recognition that the geography of his life had been shaped, in part, by things he had done without knowing they were being recorded. The 90 seconds every morning that had cost him nothing. The question about the shoulder. The 4 minutes in the corridor about a city called Lviv and a river he had never heard of and a kitchen that smelled like dill and wood smoke. He had given those things freely because it had not occurred to him to withhold them from a man who was standing alone in a hallway at the start of a shift. He had not given them as a deposit. He had not given them expecting interest. He had given them because Theodore Vazel was a person and persons deserved to be seen, and that had been, for Cole Hatfield, simply the baseline. And yet, there is a kind of mathematics that operates entirely outside human accounting, that runs its calculations in the dark, across years, through hands and memories and pieces of paper kept inside the covers of Bibles, and it had been running the whole time. Every morning in that corridor. Every question about the drive-in on an icy highway. Every moment of not laughing when someone else found cruelty convenient. The sums had been accumulating in a ledger Cole did not know existed, maintained by a man who had decided that the only debt worth tracking was the kind that came from being treated like a human being. If this story is striking something in you, something about the people you walk past every day, the ones whose names you don't know, the ones whose presence you've stopped noticing, stay there for a moment. Sometimes what we owe isn't money. It's attention. Garrett Slade, Cole heard later, had lasted 4 months in the supervisory role before a complaint about conduct was filed and the position was quietly dissolved. He had moved to a plant in Kenora. Cole heard this from the same person who had told him about the promotion, and he received the information with the same stillness he had received the first piece, set it down, did not visit it. The job in Nipigon started on a Monday. Cole drove the hour each way without complaint because the highway in that direction is straight and flat through boreal forest, and it gave him time to think, which was something he had not had enough of for a long time. Brody started turning the lights back on in rooms he wasn't using. Cole noticed this and found it, this time, simply true. He attended Theodore Vazel's memorial, a small gathering, held late, for a man whose Canadian life had been lived quietly enough that the room could hold everyone who had known him well. Alexei had organized it in the back room of a Ukrainian cultural center on Cumberland Street, and there was food that smelled like the Eastern European winter Cole had no reference for but somehow recognized as home-shaped. He sat near the back. He did not speak. He had not known Theodore well enough to speak, and he understood that, and also understood that not knowing someone well was a separate matter from owing them something. Alexei found him afterward, near the door. They shook hands. Alexei said his father had told him once that a man's real character is what he does when there is no reward in the room. He said his father had watched for this his entire life, carefully, because a man who comes from somewhere difficult learns early that the people worth trusting are not the ones who perform decency, they are the ones who have simply forgotten to perform anything else. Cole drove home through the dark on a road flanked by spruce and frozen muskeg. The temperature outside was -22. The heater ran. Brody was home with the neighbor's teenager and would be in bed already, and the house would be quiet, and the inside of the kitchen cabinet would still have Sarah's handwriting on it, marking heights that would never need updating. He thought about Theodore in that corridor. About the green maintenance uniform and the deliberate way the man moved, not slowly, but with intention, as if each part of his shift had been assigned its proper weight. About the 4 minutes in the corridor about Lviv. About the piece of paper inside the Bible. Check if is okay. 4 words. Written by a man who had no reason to believe they would ever reach anyone, who had likely written them the way a person places something carefully on a shelf before leaving a room, not knowing if anyone will ever return, but unwilling to leave without some small order imposed on what might otherwise be chaos. There are people in every building, in every shift, in every corridor who have been invisible long enough that invisibility has become their condition. They mop the floors and empty the bins and keep the washrooms functional and ask for nothing beyond the ordinary rights of people, which include being seen. Most of them do not leave instructions. Most of them do not keep names in Bibles. Most of them simply go home at the end of a shift and eat dinner and sleep and return in the morning to the particular quiet of being useful without being noticed. Cole Hatfield did not save Theodore Vazel. He did not perform a grand act. He stopped for 90 seconds every morning and asked a man how his shoulder was holding up, because the alternative, walking past like the man was furniture, had simply never occurred to him as an option. That was the whole of it. A habit so small it barely registered as a decision, accumulated over 6 years into something that turned out to carry more weight than anything else he had done in that building. Some things witnessed by no one are witnessed nonetheless. Some things given without expectation return by routes no map could trace, through the hands of a son keeping a promise to a father, through a name on a piece of paper in the cover of a Bible, through 4 words written in careful second language printing in a house in Kakabika Falls in the months before a man ran out of time. What a person plants in the dark still grows. It has always grown. The harvest simply does not arrive on any schedule the planter controls. There is someone in Cole Hatfield's story that most people will recognize, not him, but the person he walked past for years before he didn't. Most viewers have a Theodore in their own life. Someone present. Someone useful. Someone whose name they have never learned. The question worth sitting with, the one that tends to stay past the end of the story, is what those 90 seconds might cost them. And what, In time, they might be worth. This is God's Hand Stories, where every story has a hand behind it you didn't see until the very end.